What have we learned so far? Well, we have a good definition for RAW, and I think that's important to know the difference between, say, RAW and a GIF or a TIFF or a JPEG, and how they originate at the camera, not in Photoshop. We also know how to set up our preferences, and to me, ACR preferences are really important to your workflow. The next logical step, I think, is to open an image in Camera Raw and take a spin around the interface. What do you say? I'm in Bridge. You do not have to be in Bridge. You can double-click on an image anywhere you want to, and if it's RAW, it's going to open up in Adobe Camera Raw before it gets to Photoshop. You have to have that plugin. If I double-click, therefore, I go. But what about this guy down here? Actually, this gal down here. Pretty Woman JPEG. What's that doing here? Well, we'll talk about that later. But what if I do want to open her up in Camera Raw? If you right-click, open in Camera Raw. You say, well, JPEG's a lossy compression method. The image is not that great anyway. What's Camera Raw got that Photoshop doesn't have? Actually, there are some features inside of Camera Raw that can help even JPEGs. But like I said, we'll talk about that later. Okay, so I want to double-click and open up an ACR. Double-click. But if I right-click my mouse again one more time and go to Open With, I have things like Photomatics and Portrait Professional Studio, different programs that I can use if I want to. The default, though, is Photoshop, but by Photoshop, that does mean Adobe Camera Raw. So if I double-click, welcome to Adobe Camera Raw. Interface hasn't really changed that much over the last version or two, but we have some new features. Let's start up at the top and kind of work our way around clockwise. Now, we start up here with a zoom tool and a hand tool, and I think we all know what those tools do. We also have buttons down here to change the view right here. But don't forget the shortcuts, the quickies. Like if I double-click on the zoom tool, it takes me to 100%. And then I can use the hand tool to obviously move around if I want to. If I double-click on the hand tool, it takes me to a view that fits the window that I'm in. But don't forget the other shortcuts. If I come over here and I hold down the Control key, that's Control in Windows, Command on a Mac, and press the plus and minus keys, I can go up and down if I want to. If I'm not on the hand tool and I want the hand tool, you hold down the spacebar. Pretty common, but good to know. Let's double click on the hand tool, get it back down so we can see it. Next button over is for white balance. And you might be surprised how easy it is if you know where to click to white balance out or color balance an image. Now this image doesn't need it, but if I come over here just to show you something, put it in the wrong position. Looks kind of neat, but that's not what I wanted. I need to reset it. If you come down to the cancel button and hold down the Alt key, that's Alt in Windows, Option on a Mac, it changes to reset, which is true in almost every dialog box in Photoshop. It will take it back to the way the image was when it first opened. The next button over is for setting color samples. Now if I click, you can see it right here. Every time I click. And what's that for? Well, when you're doing things like color correction, you can use that information to judge how the job is going. Let's go ahead and clear those out. We're just taking a spin around right now. The next one over is for changing the curve that you're using, like going into grayscale. We're currently on what's called a parametric curve. The next button over is for cropping. Now, if you click and hold, you can crop to a particular ratio, customize your own ratio. If I come over here, just use the tool and begin doing something like that. Gives me a nice mask around it. I can move it around wherever I want. If I double click, I've cropped it. Now remember the cool thing about RAW. Let's say you do this and you save the image. And I don't know, a couple days later you come back and go, oh man, I cropped it. Bad Andy. I shouldn't have done that. Well, you can reset it. Don't forget, nothing is permanent in this program. Everything is saved to a separate area on the changes. You never hurt your negative. Let's go ahead and reset. Next button over is for straightening if you want to do that. And my straight line would be like this, just to show you how this works. And then if you double click, there you go. Okay, the water's spilling out, so let's reset. Next one over is actually pretty cool, but notice what happened when I clicked it. Things changed over here. Spot removal. You can heal or you can clone. Size, opacity, you have control. Next one over here is for removing red eye, and then this stuff changes over here again. This one's kind of neat. It is an adjustment paint brush. Now check this out. Let's look at the brush first. You have a dotted line going around it with a smaller circle on the inside that's black. Now the dotted line represents the absolute limit of the effect. The inside black area represents where it's going to hit it at 100%, and the difference between the black and the dotted line is like a gradient on the adjustment to softly bring it in. If I come over here and scroll down a little bit, you can change the size, the feather, the flow, the density, all those things. Watch what happens when I use it. Let me just do this real quick. Let me just kind of go in here and do something here. Okay. Now, if I come over here, watch what happens when I change exposure, for example. See, that's the only area it's going to change. Maybe soften that area up by removing clarity. Or even take the saturation down. Now, once you've established one area, you get a little pin right here that you can click on, and you can see the area exactly the way it is. You can even move it around a little bit if you want to. You can add new areas by clicking here, or you can erase existing areas. That's a neat brush to have. It's called the adjustment brush. Let me reset. The next two over, this one and this one, do somewhat the same thing, except they use gradients. This one uses a graduated filter, kind of like a linear gradient. This one is more of a radial. Let me show you that one real quick too, I suppose. And then, of course, we can change things around it, and it protects the area that's inside of it. That's pretty cool. Go ahead and reset again. Next one over here, we've been here, and that's preferences. Just another way to get to them. So remember, as you're working on your workflow and you decide how to do things, set preferences up to help you out. And get out of there. This one here and this one are to rotate. No big deal. This is a preview button. Turn it on and off. This button allows you to maximize what you see. We're already there. And then moving over here, we have something called a histogram. Now, the histogram is giving us physical information on the image the way it looks right now in terms of the colors red, green, and blue, cyan, magenta, and yellow. So it's showing us the mix, the histogram. If we come over here and say move exposure, now notice how it changes. What you're looking at is a visual representation of the color mix in the image. Watch what happens when I go really far this way or really far this way. Now notice these two buttons up here. Let me show you this. Let me turn this one on. That's for black, and this is for white. Now watch what happens when I change exposure this way. See those red areas begin to appear? Now if I go the other way, they'll be blue. What you're looking at when you have those on are the blown out areas. Andy, you have so changed the exposure of this image that you have turned those areas into non-areas. They're either pure black or they're pure white. If you want to see them, you turn those on. Let me turn them back off again. Down here you have RGB. And if I move over into the image, you can see it's giving me the equivalence of the RGB values on the spot where I am. Over here, it's telling me the image was taken at a 5.6, at a 1/500th of a second, ISO 200, that's the speed of the film, and a 70 to 300 millimeter lens shot at 70 millimeters. Moving down here, we have some more buttons. Now, this one is basic color correction and exposure kind of stuff. Next one over is working in curves. Next one over allows me to do things like sharpening or noise reduction. Next one over allows me to do a convert to grayscale and then choose the colors, which used to be colors, on what I want the grayscale image to be. Turn that back off. Next one over here is for split toning. Now that allows me to control the hue and saturation of just the highlight areas or just the shadows, which can be really useful in some images where those areas are blown out. The next area over here is for lens correction. Enable lens profile corrections. Setup. Let's go to auto. Now, what's the make of the camera? Mine's an Nikon. See what happened? Let me turn that on and off. The lens I was using for this particular shoot was not a really expensive lens. It was a nice one, but it's not one of these $8 million lenses that's like 3 feet long. And you can see that the lens caused some problems on the edges. It corrected that. It knew the camera, it knew the model, it knew the lens. Now you can further do it down here if you want to, but that's not too bad. It actually does correction for you. The next one over is for some effects like grain or post-crop vignetting, if you want to do things like that to the image. Next one over is for camera calibration. Next one over is for something called presets, kind of like actions. I do a couple of things to an image, and I really like what I did, but I spent a couple of minutes doing it. I have some other images I think would benefit from that, like maybe it's a special effect. I can save it right here. We'll do that later. And the last one is snapshots. Anytime I want to during the course of the development of this image, I can stop and make a snapshot of where I am at that moment in time. Now, the benefit to me of something like that is it gives me the ability to do before and after. Did I really do something better than the last time? I look at the snapshots and just click. Again, we'll do that a little bit later. Down here, we can save the image. We'll talk about that later too. This button right here, that is a button. Go ahead and click it. We can change the color space. Now, I like to work in Pro Photo. It's a relatively new format, but I think it's really good with raw images. And if I'm working on a JPEG or a TIFF, I go back to Adobe RGB. But this one really works good with RGB images at 16-bit. You will notice if I click here, I can go to 8 or 16. Now, when you shoot a regular JPEG TIFF kind of image, you're shooting them at 8-bit. 8-bit is 16.7 million colors per pixel possible. When you shoot at 16-bit, you're getting trillions of colors. Now, again, that's the camera, not you, but here's the secret. Most cameras that I know of don't shoot at 16-bit. They shoot at maybe 14 or 12 if they're shooting raw. And Adobe said, we're not going to play that game. We're going to have 2. We're going to have 8, and if you got a camera that does more than that, we're going to take everything to 16-bit. Now, 16 gives me more control and more color. I leave it there. We can change the image sizing down here, including resolution. You do have an output option here to sharpen. I don't like using this. You can. Glossy paper, matte media, or screen, and you can go standard to high. The reason I don't is I like to do my own sharpening. Okay, that's just me. But you can use that one or try it out if you want to. And you want to open the photos as smart objects. Now, that means when they open up in Adobe Photoshop, they become a smart object layer, which means most of the things you do to the image are non-destructive, but there are some things you can't do to the image if it is a smart object. I prefer to do that when I get to Photoshop if I want to, because you can, so I leave that one off too. Just my personal preference. I'm going to go ahead and click OK. Now, it will remember those settings. Now, down here, the last things, I'm ready to go to Photoshop. Click that button. I don't want to do anything. I wish I hadn't done anything. Click Cancel. Or Done. I don't want to go to Photoshop, but I made some changes and I want to save the image. And you'll go back to Bridge if you click that button instead of going into Photoshop. The Adobe Camera Raw interface. And we're going to get a little bit more detailed than this, obviously, but we won't get into a lot of heavy-duty stuff. This is a lot of photography kind of things. And if you're interested, I do a course with Infinite Skills called Photoshop for Photographers, where we are going to get a whole lot deeper into Adobe Camera Raw.